I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
There are some things that can be locked inside a palace for years. Letters can disappear into private archives. Old photographs can be removed from walls. Uncomfortable memories can be buried beneath new traditions, new titles, and carefully arranged public appearances. But one thing is much harder to erase: a legacy. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. And according to a dramatic story now circulating around royal watchers, a portrait connected to Princess Diana had spent more than 2 decades hidden away in darkness, far from the grand rooms where history was displayed. Then, without warning, the painting was brought back into the light. What happened next was said to have shaken the atmosphere inside Windsor. Because this was not simply about a portrait. It was about memory. It was about power. And it was about 2 members of the royal family who may have decided that the past had been silent for long enough. One was Prince William, the future king and the son who grew up watching the world mourn his mother. The other was Princess Anne, the woman known for her discipline, her loyalty to the crown, and her ability to say more with one cold look than most people can say in an hour. For years, both had carried the weight of Diana's absence in different ways. Then came the moment when, according to the story, they finally acted together. But there was one detail nobody expected. William may have prepared the entire plan. He may have checked every protocol, consulted every official, and made certain that no one could easily reverse what had been done. Yet the moment that reportedly caused the greatest shock was not part of William's preparation. It came from Anne. And when the words she allegedly spoke began to circulate, people were left asking one question. Had Princess Diana finally been brought back into the heart of the monarchy? Welcome, viewers, to my channel. Please subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next update. Before we continue, one important note: this story is presented as a dramatic royal narrative inspired by public history, royal commentary, and long-standing discussions surrounding Princess Diana's legacy. Some of the private conversations and palace events described here have not been independently confirmed. So as we explore this story, separate the documented history from the dramatic interpretation. Now, let us go back to the beginning. The portrait had reportedly remained unseen for years. Some described it as a striking image of Diana during the height of her public influence. Others said the painting captured something that official photographs often missed: the mixture of confidence and vulnerability that made her so different from the royal figures who came before her. Diana had a rare ability to make people feel noticed. She could walk into a hospital, sit beside someone society had ignored, and make that person feel as though they were the only individual in the room. She held the hands of people living with HIV at a time when fear and misinformation surrounded the disease. She spoke openly about mental health. She visited communities that many public figures avoided. To millions, she was not simply a princess. She was a symbol of compassion. And that is why her death on August 31, 1997, created a wave of grief unlike anything Britain had experienced in modern royal history. Outside Kensington Palace, flowers covered the ground. Messages were written by strangers. People stood behind the gates for hours, many of them crying openly. For the public, Diana's death felt personal. But inside the royal family, grief existed alongside another reality: the monarchy had to decide how it would move forward after losing one of the most famous women in the world. That question became even more complicated because Diana's image remained everywhere. She appeared on magazine covers. Her interviews continued to be discussed. Books were written about her life. Her sons grew older beneath the shadow of her memory. And no matter how much time passed, the public never stopped comparing the future of the monarchy with the woman it had lost. For Prince William, the memory was even more personal. He was only 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London. Millions watched. The cameras captured every step. But behind the carefully controlled expression was a teenager experiencing a loss that would shape the rest of his life. William later became known for his calm public manner. He learned how to smile during official engagements. He learned how to stand before crowds. He learned how to speak about duty without revealing every private emotion behind the words. But people close to the royal story have often suggested that Diana's influence never left him. It appeared in the causes he supported. It appeared in the way he spoke about mental health. It appeared in his determination to protect his own family from the most damaging parts of public life. And perhaps most importantly, it appeared in the way he continued to defend his mother's legacy. That is why the story of the hidden portrait became so powerful. Imagine walking through a palace filled with centuries of history. Portraits look down from the walls. Kings, queens, princes, and princesses are remembered through paintings that tell visitors who mattered and who helped shape the institution. Then imagine knowing that your mother, one of the most recognizable royal women in history, was absent from a place where you believed she belonged. Would you accept it? Would you remain silent? Or would you wait until you had the authority to change it? According to the dramatic account, William chose the third option. He waited. Not for weeks. Not for months. For years. The story claims that he understood something important. Emotional anger could create a public scandal, but careful planning could create permanent change. So instead of confronting people publicly, he supposedly studied the institution. He examined tradition. He looked at historical precedent. He considered how portraits were selected, displayed, and preserved. Every decision had to appear respectful. Every step had to follow procedure. And when the time finally came, the portrait would not be returned as an act of rebellion. It would be returned as an act of history. But William was not alone. There was another royal figure whose relationship with Diana's memory carried its own complexity. Princess Anne. Anne had spent her entire life inside the monarchy. She understood its rules. She understood its silences. And she understood that the strongest people inside royal institutions were not always the loudest. Unlike many members of the family, Anne rarely relied on public emotion. She worked. She attended engagements. She supported charities. She performed duties year after year without demanding attention. To the public, she became known as one of the hardest working members of the royal family. But beneath that disciplined image was someone who had witnessed decades of royal change. She had watched relationships rise and collapse. She had seen public admiration turn into criticism. She had seen how personal conflicts could become national stories. And she had watched Diana transform the monarchy. The two women were very different. Diana was emotional, expressive, and deeply connected to public feeling. Anne was private, practical, and guarded. Yet both understood the pressure of living beneath the crown. Both knew that royal life could demand sacrifices that the public never saw. And according to the story, Anne believed that history should not be rewritten simply because certain memories made people uncomfortable. That belief may have brought her closer to William's goal. The reported conversation between them was said to be brief. William allegedly told his aunt that the time had come. Anne reportedly answered that it was overdue. Then came the words that changed the direction of the story. She deserves to come home. Whether that conversation happened exactly as described remains unverified. But the idea behind it captured the imagination of royal audiences. Diana had never truly disappeared. Her legacy lived through her sons. It lived through the charities she supported. It lived through the people who still remembered meeting her. Perhaps the portrait was not bringing Diana back. Perhaps it was simply acknowledging that she had never left. Then came the day of the alleged palace operation. According to the dramatic account, a section of Windsor was temporarily closed. Officials moved quietly through corridors. The painting was brought out of storage. For years, it had supposedly remained wrapped and protected, waiting for a moment no one knew would arrive. When the covering was removed, the room reportedly fell silent. The image showed Diana not as a tragic figure from history, but as she had once been, confident, elegant, and alive. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then the portrait was carried toward its new position. The wall had been prepared. The placement had been approved. The decision, according to the story, had already passed through the necessary channels. And once the painting was secured, the moment became difficult to reverse. But there was one person who had not been told. Queen Camilla. The story claims that when she returned and saw the portrait, she stopped. For a moment, she reportedly said nothing. Then she turned toward those nearby and asked who had authorized it. No one answered immediately, because the answer was already obvious. William, the future king. And beside him stood Anne, the woman who understood palace tradition better than almost anyone. According to the story, Camilla demanded an explanation. She reportedly argued that the decision should have been discussed. She insisted that the placement could create unnecessary tension. Then came the response that changed everything. The portrait had followed procedure. The historical justification had been prepared. The necessary approvals had been completed. There was no simple order that could remove it. The painting was not hanging there as a personal attack. It was hanging there as part of the monarchy's history. And that distinction mattered. Camilla was said to have gone directly to King Charles. For years, Charles had carried the most complicated connection to Diana's legacy. She had been his first wife. She was the mother of his sons. Their marriage had ended publicly and painfully. Yet her death transformed the way the world viewed every part of their history. Charles could not erase Diana. No one could. And according to the dramatic version of events, when Camilla demanded that the portrait be removed, Charles gave an answer she did not expect. He refused. Not because he wanted conflict. Not because he wanted to embarrass anyone. But because he understood that Diana's place in history did not depend on private palace disagreements. She was the mother of the future king. She was one of the most influential royal figures of the modern era. And no matter what happened inside the family, her role could not be denied. That was when the palace atmosphere reportedly changed. Because Camilla had expected Charles to intervene. Instead, the story suggests, he accepted that William's decision had been made through proper channels. The portrait would remain. But then Anne stepped forward. And this was the moment nobody had prepared for. The room was quiet. William stood nearby. Camilla looked toward Anne. For years, Anne had been known for her restraint. She did not create public scenes. She did not reveal every private disagreement. She did not explain herself to the press. But according to the story, she looked at the portrait and spoke 5 words. She was always one of us. The room went silent. 5 words. But they carried decades of history. They did not accuse anyone. They did not mention the past. They did not reopen old arguments. They simply recognized Diana as part of the family. And that was what made them so powerful. Because titles can change. Relationships can end. People can move into new homes and take on new roles. But history remains. Diana was the mother of a future king. She was the grandmother of a future generation. She shaped the way the monarchy understood public emotion. And for millions of people, she remained the people's princess. The portrait, in this fictionalized account, became more than a painting. It became a symbol that memory could not be locked away forever. A symbol that William had reached the point where protecting his mother's legacy mattered more than avoiding discomfort. And a symbol that Anne, after decades of silence, was willing to say what others had avoided. But the story did not end there. The next morning, visitors reportedly noticed something unusual. The portrait remained. No covering had been placed over it. No announcement explained it. No palace statement denied it. It simply stood on the wall. And in the days that followed, royal commentators began discussing what the moment could represent. Was William preparing the monarchy for a different future? Was he signaling that Diana's influence would remain central to the next generation? Or was the story simply another example of how deeply the public still connected the future of the royal family to the memory of the woman who changed it forever? Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. The palace had moved on. But the public had never forgotten. And perhaps that was the real meaning behind the portrait. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Not a battle between royal women. But recognition. For 25 years, Diana's story had been told through documentaries, interviews, books, photographs, and memories. Now, in this dramatic version of events, her image had returned to a place where history could see it. William did not need to make a speech. Anne did not need to create a scandal. The painting spoke for them. And as the doors closed and the palace returned to its usual silence, the portrait remained in the light. A reminder that some people become larger than the institutions they once served. A reminder that the past cannot always be controlled. And a reminder that even after decades, one woman's legacy could still change the atmosphere inside the most powerful royal residence in Britain. Perhaps the final message was not meant for Camilla. Perhaps it was not even meant for Charles. Perhaps it was meant for history. Princess Diana was not being brought back. She had never truly gone. And if the story is to be believed, Princess Anne understood that before anyone else. She was always one of us. I can also, stronger cliffhangers, and a more